Okay, hi everyone. So what I'm going to be talking about is the long-term stable adoption of crypto. Stable is not a thing you think of as being a term that goes with crypto. Most parts, crypto is very volatile, it's very chaotic, and that's not surprising for what is still a very new technology. But we're now at a point where crypto is kind of stabilized, the rules of the game are set, and we're now in a position where it is possible to make some accurate long-term forecasts about how crypto will integrate into the global economy in future. So that's what we're going to do today. So let's start from the beginning. A little bit about me. I've basically been around crypto for 30 years. Pretty much my entire career has been sort of dotting backwards and forwards between working on cryptographic applications, often for government, finding crypto use cases in the civilian agenda, and then I became part of the Ethereum team in 2014. 2015, I ran the launch of the protocol as a project manager, and now I run a company that does the kind of legal legwork for managing crypto projects, particularly things like real-world assets, so real estate, gold, this kind of stuff. I want to start with the beginning, which is the original promise of crypto was a kind of crypto-anarchist, libertarian, anarcho-capitalist utopia. The idea was that we were going to break the way that the old world worked and create a new world, and that that new world was going to be dominated by privacy. It was going to be impossible for governments or companies to spy on you, and this was going to reel us into a kind of utopian sort of self-realization world, a world of freedom. Needless to say, this is not exactly what happened. So the cypherpunks were very clear that the government was the enemy. In the 1990s, the dominant threat was seen as being American power, and the fear was that the American government was going to dominate the entire world and you'd wind up with a kind of permanent sole superpower scenario. Now that seems like ancient history because 30 years ago, America was a very different place. It had a very different standing globally. And in those days, the fear was a kind of 1984 situation. The idea was that the entire world could wind up with something like the Chinese social credit system, and we were going to wind up basically losing our freedoms to these technologies in the hands of the state. The idea was a counterattack in which the entire financial system would be encrypted and governments would no longer be able to raise taxes. This was the original first-generation objective of crypto. Now, that argument, you think, my God, that sounds completely ridiculous. Who would ever think that? And the answer is President Obama, right? 22 years later, 2016, you have Obama talking, while still president, about the threat that crypto finance presents to the US system. What if we are no longer able to collect taxes because of this technology? What will happen? This would be a problem. So although these ideas are not talked about very much, even inside of crypto at this point, the bottom line is that they're taken extremely seriously, both by the deep technologists inside of crypto, but also by the state. And you can understand in this situation that there is a really head-on confrontation between the power of cryptography and the need of the state to be able to monitor its people for things like tax raising. That confrontation is in the context of an almost unrecognized mass adoption of cryptography. So the little padlock on a web browser, the thing that lets you know that your credit card is protected, the HTTPS padlock, is cryptography. That's 1990s era link encryption. You have two things which are connected to each other. In the middle, there could be people trying to monitor, spy, steal your credit cards. And what happens is the little padlock is a certificate of encryption that guarantees that your credit card won't be stolen off the wire. This is a hugely, hugely common thing. It's created trillions of dollars of value, and that is 1990s crypto, adopted by essentially the entire planet as the backbone of trade. So the expectation inside of the crypto community is that given time, you will see exactly the same kind of globalized adoption of the blockchain technology. You take the sort of 2008, 2014 updates to cryptography, you apply them to the whole of world trade, and you get a generation of, again, untold trillions of value. So at the same time as there is this confrontational relationship with the state, there is also the fact that the entire commercial world adopted 1990s crypto for protecting commercial transactions, and that that's the world that we live in now. So although there might be an undercurrent of tension, the bottom line is that the market decided. So within the last couple of years, something new has happened, which is that other parties have entered the fray. The Americans still have a very confused, very hostile attitude to crypto. The British government has taken a rather different track. This is a statement made by the head of civil justice for England and Wales, Sir Geoffrey Voss, who is absolutely a pillar of the establishment. From his perspective, the blockchain is inevitable, right? It's an unstoppable technological innovation because it solves real problems in law. Right? Obliterating the scope for dispute as to what has occurred will become ubiquitous in all major industrial and financial sectors. This is a very different signal from what you were getting from the American government not so long before this. Similarly, Law Commission has just gotten through legislation, the UK Electronic Trade Documentation Act, ETTA, and that enables all of the documents that go with sea containers to move from being paper documents to digital documents. And those digital documents create enormous efficiency savings. They suggest £224 million is a reasonable estimate. That's $280 billion a year of efficiency savings because of the move to electronic trade documentation rather than using paper documentation. And this, again, is coming from a government. The law to enable that transformation was passed this year. So this kind of stuff is front and center of the UK legislative agenda. Similarly, Lord Mayor of London, so that's the elected head of the UK's financial centre, which is the largest financial centre in the world, says that the next 20 years will be driven by smart economic networks based on AI, open data, and shared ledgers, among other technologies. So value will be created by digitization of assets and contracts, combining different types of high-quality data. So this is a pretty straightforward claim, right? The take in the UK is that there's going to be a mass adoption of blockchain-type technologies, mutual distributed ledgers if you prefer, and that those technologies are going to become integral to global trade. So 90s crypto, you get the little padlock, it ennobles e-commerce, trillions of dollars of value are created, including companies like Amazon. Now, mutual distributed ledgers, blockchain technology, things like Ethereum, same kind of process, but instead of now it being retail, it's now going to be wholesale. It's going to be the whole industrial backhaul. This will be how industry functions. So that transformational process is not just the UK, this is also the EU. The EU has a set of rules called MiCA, Markets and Crypto Assets. That basically establishes the EU, which is the world's largest economy, by the way, as having a single set of rules for the entire continental bloc for using the blockchain in real-world use cases. So this will be things like mortgages, it will be things like purchasing, logistics, supply chains. It will also tie up very closely to the EU Digital Product Passport legislation. And the EU Digital Product Passports are going to be applied to all consumer goods in the future, I think all, certainly most, to give you the ability to do things like circular economy and to let you know how the packaging is going to be disposed of. Most of that stuff is going to wind up on blockchains inside of this framework MiCA. So what I want to suggest is that between Obama in 2016 and the present, in that nearly 10-year period, what's happened is that the blockchain has won. There has been a tacit acceptance, okay, this thing is actually really useful, we need to figure out how we're going to slot it into our society, but we will slot it into our society. So adoption is now certain, the question is adoption on what terms. The big transformers in that transformation are largely to do with security. So the first thing is that the blockchain assets stopped being currencies and they stopped directly competing with the government. Bitcoin basically tries to suggest that it's going to be a replacement for the dollar. This is not true for things like NFTs of artwork. It's not true for electronic trade documents. All of these things are just very different use cases, and they don't have anything like the same kind of political risk attached. Similarly, most of the wallets are no longer anonymous. So in the old days, there was no way of telling who owned a Bitcoin wallet. Now you've got things like Chainalysis. It's relatively easy to figure out who owns most wallets. Or you're using things like regulated exchanges, so there's KYC, AML, CTF on those wallets as a condition of them being used on exchanges. So all of that stuff has really settled down. And finally, mass adoption has occurred. So in the States, more Americans in the under 30 age group own crypto than stocks. It's about 20% of the population of that age group. So at that point, you're in a position where it's very, very, very hard to argue with young people about what they're going to do. To some degree, that forces government to accommodate. As for what government wants from these technologies, the first thing is they don't want to rock the boat too much. They want the world to be pretty much the place it is now, but a little improved. They also want a better economy. So that talk of $280 billion of savings from electronic trade documents, that's the kind of thing that makes government go, okay, we're going to do this. And finally, they're very clear that they're not going to have any of this tax starvation nonsense. And so what you've already begun to see is heavy pressure on government, from government to not have anonymous transactions. And we'll come back to that in a second. So in this new world, what you see is a lot of small nations are beginning to take a lead on this. Singapore, Dubai, Estonia, Venezuela, the London Financial Centre, Zug in Switzerland, Liechtenstein, lots of these countries and jurisdictions have set up advanced sort of jurisdictional structures that give people the ability to get things done with crypto now rather than waiting for further changes in further changes in law. And this kind of model, adoption by small jurisdictions with long eyes, you change the way the law works, you get some mass adoption, you show how things work. The Estonian e-ID system was like that. It's exactly that kind of model where you have a breakthrough in one place and then everybody follows up. Obviously, this should be of interest to all small jurisdictions. Central bank digital currencies, another huge area of interest. I would expect 2 years from now that we will see a digital euro, a digital pound, potentially, and probably some further experiments with digital dollars. It's a very simple play. But then what of this old vision, right? The idea that there was going to be some kind of great global superpower clampdown from the Americans and they were going to run the world. The answer is that's gone, right? It's just gone. The world is multipolar. It's inevitably going to be a negotiation between a whole set of different large powers. We're no longer in a position where having a single global ruler looks like a threat in the way that it did in the 1990s. At that point, the 1990s vision of how this kind of freedom was going to exist and how it was going to be necessary has, to some degree, softened. It's not the same world that it was in the 90s. The vision of where crypto fits into the global system has to change. So where we are now is a new compromise, and it is a compromise. It is not what the crypto people wanted, but it does give you kind of a sense of the shape of the future. So the first thing is KYC in everything. The second thing is that the assets issued in crypto get legal status, and the kind of regulatory gap from really the Trump election through to the end of the COVID emergency, that sort of regulatory black hole is slowly filling in and government is catching up and tidying everything up. So we're now kind of in a position where it's much easier for people to see how crypto is going to integrate into the real world and where all those pieces will fit. But what comes with that is the end of this era of kind of decadent anonymous finance and the rule of the degens. It's a new world. So probably the final shot at the old world, the thing that was kind of the death knell of the old vision of crypto, was the conviction of a developer of a technology called Tornado Cash. I won't bore you with the details, but basically it was a technology for essentially laundering money, at least that was what government alleged, and the developer was convicted even though they did not use the technology, they just created the technology for other people to use. That almost certainly will have a universal chilling effect on people developing these kind of technologies, and as a result, you're probably going to see an end to that kind of financial privacy technology on crypto. I don't think anybody is going to be happy with that, but that does seem likely to be the future that we're going into, fortunately or unfortunately. At the same time, there's a lot of concern about deepfake text and the ability of AI to fake documents and video. So I think you can also expect there to be large-scale adoption of crypto as a way of securing things like news. And at that point, you're kind of established in a situation where crypto secures the news channels and it makes sure the social media isn't filled with propaganda, but at the same time, you don't get to use it to launder money. Mass adoption, but maybe not the kind of libertarian stuff that people had once hoped for. And blockchain and AI are very much mutually enabling technologies. They work very well together because the blockchain gives the AI systems trustworthy access to the real world and lets AI systems take action, like, for example, buying things. So here we are, right? The 1990s cypherpunk revolution not happening, right? And a lot of that is because there's just been so much scamming on crypto, nobody believes the promises that it's going to create a better world anymore through this kind of freedom. Turns out that the freedom needed to come with effective self-regulation, and without that, there's been so much abuse of these technologies that we've lost access to the political vision, which is crypto is going to make the world a better place by enabling anonymous trade. We've had 10 years of anonymous trade. Most of it has been really, really bad quality stuff. And now at that point, the crypto-anarchist vision is basically parked again. But it's not parked because it was fully implemented. Right? This is from the 1994 document I quoted at the beginning, right? The Cyphernomical and the Crypto-Anarchist Manifesto. So it says very clearly that you need reputation systems, right? You need systems for reputation, you need trust, you need some kind of systemic model of justice. If you don't have these things, it is very, very difficult to build anything resembling a functioning economy on crypto. So you either have to self-regulate or you will be regulated. Crypto did not manage effective self-regulation. They never managed to set up a situation where there were very good systems for verifying whether projects were fraudulent or non-fraudulent. There weren't systems for getting on top of the problem if something did turn out to have a defect. There wasn't an insurance model, there wasn't a court, there wasn't dispute resolution. Basically, we left people with no rights and they were left to fend for themselves in an environment where people who had a lot more understanding of the technology and a lot more access were basically taking their assets. So I would suggest here that this is not a failure of the cyberpunk model of the world, or the cypherpunk model of the world, I should say, but it's a failure to implement that model faithfully. Without the reputation systems, without systems of trust, without systems of justice, there's no way of doing this. So final point is we're entering the era of regulatory neglect. This is the part where most of the regulatory power is going into dealing with AI. That's the new hot topic. It's having very large social impacts already. Government is probably not going to do much new with crypto from this point onwards. It will settle in as an accepted part of the mainstream trade system, and after that, this is the equilibrium we'll get until the next technological revolution arrives. So I just want to leave you with one thought, which is e-commerce was built on strong cryptography. The 90s revolution built the entire e-commerce system. I would suggest that the Bitcoin and Ethereum revolutions are going to build the next system, and probably what that's going to do is take the entire global system for real estate and finally modernize it so that real estate is exchanged electronically, so that container shipping moves into an electronic format, and that will fuel another enormous expansion in the economy as these otherwise hard to digitize asset classes are digitized. And that's going to be the future. It's not that crypto has failed, but it's mainstreamed into the world that we have rather than creating a new world around it. Thank you very much.